I am going to do a few stories about libraries, oddly enough. I have 3 in mind. They're sort of different articles actually about libraries. One is very controversial, and I'm going to do that one today. The other 2, one is going to sound like a boring subject, but I think it will be really interesting. And the last one I'd like to do is sort of a SJW type article that I'm going to read and talk about. It's been in the news a little bit, but that won't be for a little bit. I'm going on vacation in a few weeks, so we'll see if I make it. This one is timely, although Pride Month is over. And I gotta say, I don't like Pride Month anymore. I don't have a problem with homosexuals. I don't have a problem with the LGBT community. I think they've had a lot of terrible things happen to them, and that's not okay. I think as Americans, we need to at least leave each other alone. That tends to be the minimal amount due to each other, is everyone should leave each other alone unless they feel like they're interfering with them. That sentence probably doesn't work that well, but whatever. You know, my rights end at your nose was the old saying, and I like that. What has happened to the gay movement, though? It's really interesting. It used to be like a fun community. And I know they've had a lot of discrimination. That seems to be subsiding, at least subsiding, and maybe closer to non-existent. In certain veins, there is still discrimination, but the type of discrimination that now exists for the LGBT community is discrimination that is protected. It's I can discriminate past my nose, and the rights that they're now asking for seem like they're creeping into other people's civil liberties. The wedding cake, the gay wedding cake controversy, and there are a bunch of them, gay wedding venue controversy, which has come up a little bit too. Less so because I know there is a worry that they'll start forcing churches to perform same-sex marriages. I think we're pretty far away from that, or at least I hope we are, because this is where you start to, for other people's feelings, invade people's civil liberties. And you don't want to invade someone else's civil liberties for what you perceive as your civil liberties, because right there, you're now overextending what your civil liberties are. But this is sort of a second point, but it's mainstreamed, which has its advantages and its downfall. It feels like now the LGBT movement is brought to you by McDonald's. I'm loving it. And that, it hurts the movement. It makes the movement seem corporate backed. And this is where people start to get a little nervous about, I don't know, why is McDonald's celebrating Pride Month? I mean, what does McDonald's care? Buy their burgers. Do burger advertisements. But there's a certain amount of competition of who is the most woke. And I don't know if it helps their corporate brand. I'm sure they did studies that said, well, you know, if we put rainbow flags out on Pride Month, we'll get more business. And that hurts a movement because it makes the movement seem disingenuous now, where it's sponsored by, you know, Lowe's, or the Gay Pride Parade, for example, was televised on ABC, the local one. I'm around Philadelphia, so the local one in Philadelphia, but I believe the national one, or at least the New York one, which would be considered the national one, was broadcast on their local affiliates, and I'm not sure if it was broadcasted on the national. But this makes it not a movement now. I don't know exactly what to call it. And ABC does all the parades. I mean, they do the Puerto Rican parade and the Mummers Parade and things like that, but those aren't movements. The gay rights movement, I don't know if it's a movement anymore. It's now been bought and packaged and sold. It's now becoming a commodity, a product, a way to show that you're with a certain group of people. But I didn't want to talk too much about that, because that's not a library story. That's sort of a story. What I wanted to talk about was Drag Queen Storytime. Now, particularly there was a local one in the Lansdale Library. Now, to explain the Lansdale Library, I live in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Lansdale is in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Now, the libraries I go to, as you know, I'm from Conshohocken. I did a show about that. I have a Conshohocken library. But the Conshohocken library is connected with other Montgomery County libraries, which is great because if they don't have a book, but another Montgomery County library does, I can request that book and it will get shipped there, no cost to me, and I get the book. And it's great. You know, it has a nice online catalog. I lived many years ago in the Lansdale area, and the closest library was the Lansdale Library. It's what's called an unincorporated library. It's its own library. And frankly, as a library, it sucks. I hate it, and someday maybe I will do Montgomery County Library reviews. I'd love to. I've been to a few. There's some great ones in the area. Lansdale Library is a children's library with an adult section. And I hate that. I just hate it. I don't hate children's literature. It's important for kids to read. To me, children's literature didn't touch me as a kid. I don't remember many stories from when I was a kid. And the stories I do remember sort of fall into young adult and little children. James and the Giant Peach was probably one of my favorite books growing up. And that's technically a children's book, but there aren't a ton of pictures, and it's a chapter book. But Lansdale has a huge children's section, and I would say a much smaller and not a great catalog of books in their section. Now, I haven't been there for many years, so maybe they improved that, but I sort of doubt it. So just to rip on Lansdale Library in general, I don't like the library. I don't like that it's unincorporated, and if there's a book they don't have and you're a member, too bad. I also had to pay for my membership. That's because I didn't live in Lansdale proper. Whatever, that's fine. It does collect tax money as well. So they had what was called Drag Queen Story Time. Now, it was a controversy here, and I'm going to talk about both sides of this. The controversy has a two-sided. It was controversial for some people, and some people really supported it. The supporters of it, I want to go over first, because I would fall in the people who don't support this. Drag queens are fun, but they're adult fun, as far as I see them. And I understand what they're driving at as acceptance. And we can talk about acceptance versus tolerance. I think you should tolerate everyone. We tolerate each other. That's part of the American deal. I talked about it earlier where, you know, your rights end at your nose, or your rights end at my nose. And there's a tolerance to that. Like, oh, this person is like this, and we should tolerate that. But we don't need to accept it. But again, I don't have a problem with drag queens. I've been to drag queen nights at certain bars and things like that, and it can be very fun. It's funny. It's a festive type night, but it's very adult. Drag queens, to a certain extent, are sexualized. The over makeup, the big clothes, the hair, the makeup. I mentioned the makeup, but sort of the whole drag queen, you know, walk and jokes and those drag queen nights. It's a very sexually charged. They're very sexually charged events, and that's okay for adults. But I don't know if it's okay for children. Drag Queen Storytime is not supposed to be a sexually charged event, and I don't necessarily think it is. But drag queens in general are sexually charged beings as their, you know, drag queen self. And the other thing was the drag queen they got for Lansdale has a name that is galling to people that would be against it anyway. It's Annie Christ. I'll say that again, Annie Christ. It's a real stick to Christians, especially Christians that are not big fans of drag queens and would not want a tax-funded event with a drag queen at their local library. It may be against that. And the fact that they chose that drag queen. Now, I'm not exactly sure, and I was trying to read up on who decided. It sounded like the library opened up, sort of has opened up public space, and you can pay for the space, and they sort of let everyone in. But there's a certain amount of advertisement the library did too, and this is where we get into the problems. Antichrist, and are we hearing it now? Yeah. Antichrist, very funny. It's a spit in the face of Christians, especially Christians that really take this stuff seriously. And that in a public space is not okay. And it's funny because the whole night was about accepting people for who they are. I guess unless they're fundamental Christians, then fuck them. They don't accept those people. They're bad. I always find these, because a bunch of parents brought their kids, of course, and talked about how important it was to teach them to be accepting of others and be who you are. And you're okay the way you are. By the way, I think that's a dangerous statement to children. You're okay the way you are. There's a line there. You should tell your children to be better. Your children should be better. You should be better. You should be striving to be better every day. But I don't really want to get into that. I want to get more into the drag queen story time. So this is obviously a push your finger in a Christian's face. Like, we're going to have Antichrist read drag queen story time to your kids. And it's... A lot of people go, ugh, I don't like the gender confusion we've pushed on the little kids. And this is another part of the problem. I think it's okay to tell a boy he's a boy and a girl she's a girl. And if gender dysphoria issues start to crop up, this is something you need to deal with on an individual level. But I actually think therapy is the first step, because there's a high suicide rate for gender dysphoria, and it's something that I don't think you rush into going, oh, my son just said he was a girl. Okay, he's a girl now. Let's give him puberty blockers. And that to me is something you really should suss out with a licensed therapist and see where maybe this is not quite what the child wants, because there's no going back then. I know some doctors say there is, but there really isn't. So I don't like the pushing of gender confusion. And the thing with drag queens is they're not transsexual. Drag queens are men who feel like they're men, and they just dress like women, sort of on the side as a different personality. It's like Clark Kent and, Supergirl type thing, if I'm making the analogy right, where they're usually normal, men. They not all drag queens are homosexual even, and the one reading at the Lansdale Library is not a homosexual man. He's a heterosexual man who happens to like being a drag queen. Cool, whatever. The issue is, I think there's some gender confusion because so much of what a child doesn't really understand sexuality, and probably shouldn't. It's one of the nice things about being a child is you don't have to worry about sexuality yet. It's something you're sort of free from thinking about. The other side of this is the drag queen community. I feel like, and I don't know, I'm not a drag queen, and I don't know many drag queens. I've seen them, I've met them briefly, but I've never, had a long, deep conversation about drag queens. It feels like part of the fun of being a drag queen is being counterculture. It's sort of got like a punk rock feel to it, where when punk rock becomes an acceptable medium, you have Green Day. I like Green Day, they're cool, but they don't have the same sort of feel and danger of punk rock. It's like punk rock light. It's a strawberry daiquiri. It's like, oh, this is good, but, I'd rather just drink Jameson. And so I feel like on the other side, and I don't know, I'd love to interview a drag queen and find out what they think about the mainstreaming of their small little counterculture being pushed out into the spotlight and saying, hey, this is okay, and it's not dangerous at all. It's totally normal, and it's not something you want normies to start to accept. To not accept. Oh, no, yeah. It's not something you want normies to be like, oh, this is great. Drag queens are awesome. We should have them teaching our school in drag. It's something fun for, late night clubs and gay bars and things like that. It's exciting because it's a bit taboo. But when you mainstream it, it really kills the joy and fun of drag queens. It makes it boring and, Saturday morning cartoon. I found that interesting, the mainstreaming of drag queens, the making them less fun and making it a controversial thing. And then here's the thing. You wouldn't have gay story time, lesbian story time, bisexual story time, transgender story time. If there was a story time with someone who happened to be transgender, I don't even know if you'd point that out to the kids. You would just have this transgender person doing the story time. And no one would care. Because I shouldn't say no one would care. Some people would care. But it wouldn't be advertised as some sexualized thing. And drag queen story time sounds a bit sexualized. And on the other side of it, the protesters, I think they really made a mistake. They pushed a lot of the Jesus wouldn't like this narrative, and I actually think that's the weakest part of their argument. And if you went with what I'm arguing, now part of it is that you're not going to say, hey, drag queens are fun, but they're for adults, but that is sort of part of the protest should be, look, this seems inappropriate for kids. And not on a religious level, just a general level, that drag queens are sexualized. The drag queens are sexualized. That's part of sort of what a drag queen is. And that would be protest item number one. Number two is actually a judo move in protesting this, in that you point out who this person is. Now, they were interviewed, and they had a lot of bad things to say about Catholic school, which is so boring at this point. Everyone who talks about how terrible Catholic school is, my eyes roll in the back of my head. I get it. It was so terrible for you, and I'm sure it was tough on a lot of people. This person's name, you had somewhere pasted up on a sign saying "Drag Queen Story Time with Annie Christ." And the whole reason to have this, and I read interviews with parents who brought their kids, and it was for their kids to learn acceptance. Fine, you then have to accept people with different religious views than you, different religious mores than you. And what this person does is he, by his name, and I am saying he, it's not a transgender thing because this guy identifies as a male. I don't know how the drag queen pronouns thing works. I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm just pointing out that he's a he and identifies as a he. His name, his stage name being Annie Christ, is a spit in the face of Christians. And I don't know how you can preach acceptance with someone like this. Like, this is another misstep by these people to go, oh, this is an acceptance thing, and to have this person, if it was Devon Fabulous, everyone would be like, that's okay, that's a little, I probably still wouldn't like it, but at least it's not like a direct affront to Christianity. Because that's the other part of it, is that's what seems so fucked up about this particular person, is they have this very negative feeling towards religion. Again, fine, but if you're going to be the person who preaches acceptance, maybe not that stage name. Maybe change it for your reading time at the local library. I mean, who cares? If you're going to do drag queen story time, do a, Joanne Fabulous or whatever, instead of a giant middle finger to the Christian community in Lansdale. And I thought that this was the opportunity missed, and this is what always gets me mad, is I read the comments from the other side, and it was just like, ugh, no, guys, you don't do it that way. You could do it smarter. You can make them look like the uncaring people. Because apparently, and I don't know, I didn't hear it, and I get very mistrustful with news sources sometimes. People were yelling, there were protesters outside. They were yelling homophobic slurs at the other crowd, and there was another crowd of sort of like-minded people, the LGBT activists that went and created a wall of love. And this is the thing, the LGBT activist community has done a very good job of making their movement all about love. But again, you have this drag queen named Annie Christ. That's not love. That's hatred. And there was such a missed opportunity from the and it was mostly Christians protesting to point out that these are the two main problems, is that drag queens are generally sexualized, and that a name like that is obviously an affront to Christianity, like an obvious spit in the face. And the fact that no one really covered it like that is a bit surprising. So I just want to wrap this up and say, drag queen story time to me is a bad idea. I know it works, and maybe in some cities, some very liberal cities like San Francisco, it may work a little better, but a working class suburb of Philadelphia seems like the wrong place for it, and the Lansdale Library sucks anyway. So in conclusion, drag queen story time is a mistake. I think it's weird. Again, I don't know if it helps the LGBT movement. If you had a gay person reading if it was just like, hey, this guy who's gay, and he's going to do story time, no one would care. And the one thing I thought was a little gross on both sides was that these kids were in danger. I heard some people say these kids were in danger, as if like this drag queen couldn't help themselves around children. I always think that's a bad argument because it's generally not true. And the Lansdale Library came and said, oh, he had his background checks and he checked out, which I of course wasn't surprised about. I didn't think they would let a child molester read to children. That would be I think that would be universally agreed. If it was a molester story time, I think a lot of people would step up and be like, no. That would be an unattended event that all the people who came would be outside protesting. And that would really bring people together. I guess if Lansdale wanted to bring people together, that would be the way to do it. I have a big problem with this across the country. And I said San Francisco earlier. I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong-headed. I think gender confusion in little children is a bad thing. I think that it's become like this, I'm not going to tell my child, my child's going to decide what gender is weird, because it goes with the saying of like being assigned a gender at birth. You're born a gender, unless you're born like a hermaphrodite or intersex person, but that's a birth defect, not like a choice. So I think gender confusion with kids is bad. I think pushing kids to have to think about sexuality and putting them in sexualized situations is bad. And I think in this particular case, this very anti-Christian moment and this person's name is also bad, especially if the message of story time, if you're going to do this, the obvious message is going to be, it's okay to be different, it's okay to be accepted. Well, I'd love to hear what these parents would feel if their 10-year-old or their 13-year-old after this went, you know what, I really want to go to that conservative Baptist church down the street, or I want to become a Catholic priest, and I think homosexuality is morally wrong. I think all people are loved by Jesus, but I think homosexuality is morally wrong. Like, would these parents go, oh, you know what, that's so great, and I support you 100%. I have some serious doubts they would. And this is the problem, is this acceptance, tolerance movement, it's acceptance for people I agree with, and not acceptance for people I don't agree with. No parents brought their kids and went, well, I think being a drag queen is morally wrong, but I want to teach my child acceptance. It's generally parents who are very liberal, who are very progressive, that say, I think it's wonderful this person's a drag queen, and I want to teach my child acceptance. But you're probably already doing that anyway if you have that open of a everything's acceptable. So I don't think you're actually exposing your child to learning acceptance. You're exposing them to what your political beliefs are. Well, this show ran a little long. I was under the impression maybe I'd fit 3 subjects in, but no, this is going to be a nice little series, and I'm very excited about it. So tune in next time. I'm going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is library fines. That's right. We're going to talk about library fines. Whew. No, seriously, it's going to be a really interesting show. I have a lot of things to say on library fines. from someone who's paid out a lot of library fines, you might be surprised at my take. All right, well, thanks for listening.